Canada is one of the world's largest energy producers, and yet we sell our energy like a landlocked country. That isn't because we lack resources, and it isn't because nobody wants what we produce, and it isn't because pipelines are impossible to build. It's because Canada never finished the conversation about where our energy should go. Southbound pipelines dominate the debate, but if Canada wants economic sovereignty, trade leverage, and long-term stability, the discussion has to expand. West, east, and north. I'm your host, Pierre Shields, and this is North of MAGA. Before we get into it, I want to shout out to some friends I see in the comments. So hi to Mr. Fraser, Mr. Vaillancourt, Mr. Doucette from New Brunswick, Mr. Lavallée, Mr. Cormier, lots of misters. Lord Kiltridge, Miss Beaulieu, Mrs. Pitcher, Mr. Gustafson, Mr. McDonald, and of course, Linfy. Now, let's talk about pipelines and sovereignty. Why pipelines still matter. Pipelines have become a symbolic issue in Canada. They're often framed as a referendum on climate change rather than as what they actually are, trade infrastructure. Pipelines don't create production. They don't force consumption. They don't lock in demand. They move goods that already exist to markets that already buy them. Every serious exporting country understands this. Canada, oddly, keeps treating it as a moral dilemma instead of an economic one. That hesitation has consequences. Canada's core problem, over-reliance on one customer. Right now, Canada sells the majority of its oil and gas to the United States. That creates three structural problems. First, Canada becomes a price taker. When there's only one dominant buyer, they set the terms. Second, Canadian producers sell it at a discount, not because of quality, but because of constrained access. Third, political leverage flows south, not north. This isn't anti-American. It's pro-Canadian. It's basic trade math. No advanced economy should rely so heavily on a single export route. The Western option, the Trans-Pacific Corridor. Let's start with the West. When people talk about a Trans-Pacific pipeline, they're usually misunderstanding the term. There will never be a pipeline across the Pacific Ocean. What actually matters is westbound infrastructure that reaches tidewater where energy can be shipped to global markets. That's the strategic role of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. It connects Alberta to the British Columbia coast, enabling tankers to serve Asia, Japan, South Korea, India, Southeast Asia. These are stable, high-demand markets that already import massive volumes of energy, and they pay global prices. Even the option to sell into these markets strengthens Canada's negotiating position with everyone else. Trans Mountain isn't about choosing Asia over the US. It's about not being forced into one lane. Why the West is necessary, but not sufficient. Here's the critical point. One pipeline doesn't equal a national strategy. The West Coast helps with global diversification, but it still leaves Canada exposed to regional bottlenecks, political disputes, and capacity limitations. If Canada wants true trade resilience, it needs multiple exits. That brings us east. The Eastern option, the pipeline that never got built. Eastern Canada imports foreign oil. Let that sink in. While Canada is one of the world's top producers, Atlantic Canada still relies heavily on offshore and foreign suppliers. The now cancelled Energy East pipeline would have reversed that. It would have carried Canadian energy eastward, reduced imports from geopolitically risky regions, and turned Atlantic ports into export hubs. This wasn't about forcing oil through Quebec or New Brunswick for ideological reasons. It was about internal energy security and national integration. Energy East failed not because it lacked economic logic, but because the regulatory environment became unpredictable and endlessly expandable. Investors didn't see certainty, they saw risk. Eastbound pipeline and national cohesion. An eastbound pipeline isn't just about exports. It's about treating Canada like a single economic space. Right now, we move energy north-south more easily than east-west. Makes no sense. That's backwards for a country this large. Eastern access would reduce reliance on imports, stabilize domestic pricing, and strengthen Atlantic Canada's role in global trade. And again, this isn't about increasing production. It's about routing. The northern option, Hudson's Bay. Now let's talk about the option nobody wants to touch, Hudson's Bay. Historically, Churchill was a strategic export port. Climate change, ironically, has reopened the conversation. Longer ice-free seasons make northern shipping increasingly viable. A corridor towards Hudson's Bay could shorten shipping distances to Europe, create a northern export outlet, and strengthen Arctic sovereignty through economic presence. This wouldn't be simple, it wouldn't be cheap, and it wouldn't replace west or east routes, but it could complement them. Infrastructure equals presence, presence equals sovereignty. That principle applies in the Arctic as much as anywhere else. The bigger picture, this is about options. None of these routes are mutually exclusive. West, east, and north don't compete. They reinforce each other. Together, they transform Canada from a captive supplier into a flexible exporter. That flexibility strengthens government revenues, national leverage, and long-term transition funding. You don't finance the future by shrinking the present. In my consulting business, I've seen this a zillion times. When times are lean, companies will start cutting. I get it. Liquidities are the name of the game. So you cut, but you got to be careful where you cut. I've seen companies that will say, for example, let's cut 2 salespeople because they're expensive. When times are lean, you want to work on cutting where appropriate, but you got to think about growth. Cutting the people that bring in the revenue and the liquidities is not the place to cut. The same thing is happening with our governments. Here in Quebec, I hear the government talking about austerity and cutting costs all over the place and so on. Absolutely. Makes perfect sense. We want to cut where things are wasteful. Oh, I don't want to use waste, fraud, and whatever. But we want to cut where there's waste. But you can't cut your way to growth. I never hear the government talking about, yes, we need to cut, but we're going to be investing in X, Y, and Z. Canada is an energy superpower. We're just not investing in the growth or thinking long term. Absolutely, it's going to cost a lot. People ask, I mean, you see in the comments when I talk about building the grip in and so on in Canada, people talk about where's this money going to come from? We have the money. We just need to be strategic. And of course, pipelines don't get built in a day. This is a long-term strategy. This is for my kids and this is for your kids. Okay, I've gone on long enough. Blah, 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 blah. Takeaway. Pipelines aren't a climate debate. They're a sovereignty debate. The real question isn't whether Canada should sell energy. It's whether Canada should decide where and how it sells it. If you want serious conversations about Canada's economy, trade, and sovereignty, subscribe to North of MAGA. And tell me in the comments, which route matters most, west, east, or north? Also, like and share these videos with someone you think needs to hear some positive Canadian news. If everybody watching this video shares it with one person, we'll be able to hit a zillion. That's it. That's the ticket. A zillion subscribers in no time. Also, come see my merch store and suggest anything you'd like. Thanks for spending time with me. I'm your host, Pierre Shields. This has been North of MAGA. Go play outside.